Hello. Settle in comfortably. Wrap yourself up warmly and let the gentle whisper of stories carry you into a deep, peaceful sleep. Our journey begins not with sleigh bells and tinsel, but with the biting winds of early winter, a time of profound uncertainty and ingrained apprehension. Imagine standing in a muddy medieval village as the first discernible chill of November bites, signaling the inexorable approach of the year's darkest months. This was not merely a seasonal shift. It was a societal pivot, a period of genuine peril. For the majority of Europe's agrarian population, the autumn harvest, meticulously gathered and stored, represented their very survival. Without modern refrigeration or extensive transport networks, food shortages were a constant dread. The period between November and late February, often referred to as the hungry gap, frequently witnessed the highest mortality rates, particularly among the young and elderly, primarily due to malnutrition and disease exacerbated by cold. Historical records from manorial accounts and monastic chronicles, such as those detailing grain yields and provisions at Fountains Abbey in Yorkshire, consistently highlight the precarious balance between sustenance and starvation during these months. However, amidst this existential struggle, a flicker of anticipation began to ignite. For the burgeoning Christian population of medieval Europe, the approaching winter solstice carried a powerful theological message: the promise of light returning, both literally and spiritually. Early Christian communities strategically assimilated these ancient traditions. As noted by historians like Ronald Hutton in The Stations of the Sun, the Church in the 4th century deliberately placed the Feast of the Nativity, Christmas, on December 25th. This date, coinciding with the Roman Sol Invictus festival and various Germanic and Celtic winter celebrations, served a dual purpose: to supplant pagan rituals with a Christian narrative and to offer spiritual solace during a time of natural darkness. The narrative was clear. Just as the sun began its ascent after the solstice, so too did the Sun of Righteousness offer hope and salvation. This integration wasn't seamless, often resulting in a fascinating syncretism of ancient customs and nascent Christian practices, laying the foundations for the Christmas traditions we scarcely recognize today. As the last leaves fell and the days grew noticeably shorter, a different kind of preparation began, one deeply rooted in the ancient silence of pre-Christian Europe. Long before the bells of Christianity rang out, European cultures, from the Germanic tribes to the Celts, observed various winter solstice festivities. These were not merely celebrations. They were ritualistic acknowledgements of the longest night, a terrifying annual event that threatened to engulf the world in perpetual darkness. Archaeological findings, such as the alignments at Newgrange in Ireland and Maeshowe in Orkney, Scotland, clearly demonstrate sophisticated understanding and reverence for the sun's cycles dating back millennia. These monumental structures, built with precision to illuminate only during the solstice, underscored the profound importance of the returning sun. The Yule festival, primarily observed by Germanic peoples, involved elaborate rituals designed to ensure the sun's return and to appease powerful winter deities. One prominent feature was the burning of the Yule log, a massive piece of wood carefully selected and often adorned. This log would burn for 12 days, its fire symbolizing the sun and its continued presence protecting the household from malevolent spirits. Dr. Stephen Pollington, a scholar of Old English history, notes the deeply ingrained pagan cosmology that informed these practices, where the boundaries between the living and the spirit world were believed to be thinnest during the darkest months. These customs were not merely superstitious. They were vital strategies for coping with the psychological and physical hardships of winter. Even as Christianity spread across Europe, these deeply embedded customs did not simply vanish. Instead, they adapted and blended. The warming hearth, once a focal point for ancient Yule rituals, remained the emotional and practical core of the medieval home during the long winter nights. The flickering light of its fire pushed back both the literal darkness and the psychological gloom, providing a sense of security against the unknown. Monastic records, while often condemning pagan practices, also reveal a tacit acceptance, or at least an inability to fully eradicate, many localized traditions. This confluence of ancient beliefs and nascent Christian doctrine created a complex tapestry of observances where the echoes of primeval fears and the whispers of a new faith intertwined around the promise of renewed light. This intricate blending would profoundly shape the medieval Christmas as it began to take form. The air itself shifted as winter deepened, carrying a distinctive scent that would have been instantly recognizable to any medieval inhabitant. It was a complex aroma compounded of wood smoke, damp earth, simmering pottage, and the subtle, underlying tang of livestock sheltered from the elements. This pervasive olfactory landscape signaled not only the harsh realities of the season, but also a growing anticipation. For much of the population, particularly the peasant majority, the Christmas period, or Christmastide, was not a single day, but a protracted season of relative respite. A welcome break from the relentless agricultural labor cycle. The cessation of fieldwork was a critical factor. From roughly St. Martin's Day, November 11th, to Plough Monday, the first Monday after Twelfth Night, often around January 10th and 17th, the rhythms of daily life largely shifted indoors. This period provided the opportunity for necessary repairs, spinning, weaving, and simple crafts, but also for communal gatherings that punctuated the long, dark evenings. Research into medieval agricultural calendars, such as those found in illuminated manuscripts like the Très Riche Heure du Duc de Berry, visually depicts this seasonal dormancy, with etched scenes of feasting and indoor activities contrasting sharply with the strenuous toil of other months. During this interval, preparations for the upcoming feast days gained momentum. Food, painstakingly preserved from the autumn slaughter and harvest, began to be brought out. Smoked meats, dried fish, root vegetables stored in cold cellars, and preserved fruits, often in the form of jams or baked goods, would have formed the core of the Christmastide diet. Imagine the rich, earthy scent of a newly opened barrel of salted pork, or the faint sweetness of honey cakes baked in a wood-fired oven. These foods, while common throughout the winter, would have been prepared in greater quantities and with more variety for the feast days. The anticipation wasn't just gastronomic, it was also social and spiritual. The church calendar provided a framework, with Advent, a period of fasting and reflection preceding Christmas itself. This created a build-up, a deliberate deferral of celebration that heightened the eventual joy. Unlike modern Christmas, which often climaxes on December 25th, medieval Christmastide was a continuous celebration, a multi-day period designed to maximize the communal release of tension and hardship. This cultural rhythm, dictated by both environmental necessity and religious dogma, forged a distinct seasonal identity where the weight of winter was temporarily lifted by the promise of shared warmth, sustenance, and ultimately, a collective renewal of spirit. Despite the anticipation and the promise of feasting, It is critical to contextualize the medieval Christmas within the constant shadow of scarcity. For the vast majority, sustenance was a daily struggle, and even the most lavish Christmas feasts of the aristocracy stood in stark contrast to the everyday reality of the common person. The primary staples, bread, grains, and pottage, formed the bedrock of the diet. Detailed household accounts from the 13th and 14th centuries, such as those from monastic houses like Norwich Cathedral Priory or the Bishop of Winchester's estates, consistently illustrate that meat was a luxury, especially during much of the year. The feast for a peasant during Christmastide, though undoubtedly a welcome respite, was still dictated by basic availability and the limits of preservation technology. While smoked bacon, salted beef, or dried fish might appear on the table, it was not the abundance reflected in modern carols. Often, it meant larger portions of the usual fare, perhaps with the inclusion of a richer stew, some fresh cheese if dairy animals were still producing, or a rare treat of a goose or chicken, traditionally reserved for special occasions or sale. Cookbooks from the period, like the form of Curie, c. 1390, primarily cater to noble households, detailing complex dishes involving exotic spices and expensive cuts of meat that were entirely out of reach for the vast majority. The persistent threat of famine following poor harvests or prolonged harsh winters meant that the echoes of hunger were never far off. The Great Famine of 1315 to 1317, which devastated much of Northern Europe, serves as a stark reminder of humanity's vulnerability to agricultural failures, resulting in widespread death and social upheaval. Even in less extreme years, chronic undernourishment was common. A medieval peasant's hands, calloused and often arthritic from a lifetime of manual labor, were a testament to the bare-bones existence. Therefore, the celebratory spirit of Christmastide for the common folk was less about opulent indulgence and more about basic survival and the shared joy of enduring another year. It was a brief period when the collective efforts of the community allowed for slightly more generosity, a momentary lifting of the burden of work, and a profound appreciation for the warmth of the hearth and the precious grains that sustain them. The significance of bread, baked perhaps from a slightly finer flour, or a sweeter pottage, cannot be overstated in this context, representing not just a meal, but a testament to successful labor and communal resilience. On Christmas Day itself, the pervasive chill of the medieval morning would have been met not with presents under a tree, but with the solemn duty of communal worship. The Church, as the central institution of medieval life, dictated the rhythm of celebration, transforming the pagan solstice into Christ's Mass. The primary act of celebration was attendance at a series of religious services. For many, this began with a pre-dawn Mass, often referred to as cockcrow Mass, or the first Mass of Christmas, symbolizing the birth of Christ in the darkness. Imagine entering a cold, cavernous stone church, the air thick with the breath of the assembled congregation, the only significant warmth emanating from a few flickering candles and the body heat of those pressed together. The incense, the Latin chants, the shimmering vestments of the clergy, and the hushed reverence would have created a profound, almost mystical atmosphere. Liturgical calendars and church records from cathedrals like Canterbury and Notre Dame confirm the elaborate services prescribed for Christmas Day, often involving multiple masses throughout the day, each with specific readings and hymns. The morning Mass, sometimes called the Aurora Mass or Shepherd's Mass, and the principal day Mass, was central to the day's spiritual observances. For the common person, participation was largely passive, literacy was low, and Latin was largely incomprehensible. Yet the visual spectacle, the communal gathering, and the simple act of shared breath in a cold sanctuary fostered a powerful sense of unity and spiritual belonging. Historians, such as Eamon Duffy in The Stripping of the Altars, emphasize the sensory richness of medieval worship and its integral role in forging collective identity and articulating theological truths to an largely illiterate populace. The church was not just a building, it was the heart of the community, and its rituals were the bedrock of public life. This emphasis on spiritual devotion contrasts sharply with modern secular celebrations. While elements of merriment did exist, they were generally secondary to the prescribed religious observance. The warmth of shared breath in the church was not merely physical, it was socio-spiritual, connecting individuals to their neighbors, their ancestors, and a divine narrative that gave meaning to their often harsh existence. The Christmas morning, therefore, was a ritualistic journey from darkness to light, mirroring the solstice's promise, but now imbued with profound Christian significance, setting the tone for the revelry that would follow. Beyond the solemnity of morning prayer, the Christmas season in medieval towns pulsed with the specific rhythms of the craft guilds. These powerful organizations, which regulated trades from baking to carpentry, often played a significant role in public life, especially during festive periods. For guild members, Christmas wasn't just a religious holiday. It was a time of communal gatherings, displays of organizational pride, and often acts of charity aimed at reinforcing their social standing and internal cohesion. Imagine the bustling market squares, despite the cold, where the various guilds might present their annual mystery plays. These theatrical performances, often based on biblical stories, were not mere entertainment. They served as both religious instruction and vivid demonstrations of the guild's skill and commitment. For instance, the shipwrights might stage the Noah's Ark story, while the bakers might recount the Last Supper. Records from cities like York and Coventry detail extensive guild participation in these pageants, with each guild responsible for funding and performing a specific scene on movable carts or pageant wagons. This created a dynamic, mobile theatrical experience traversing the town. The prickle of expectation, however, extended beyond religious pageantry. Guilds often organized charitable distributions, particularly to their poorer members, the indigent in their parish, or local monastic houses. These acts reinforced their communal role and fulfilled moral obligations. Guild accounts, such as those of the London Mercers' Company, occasionally record expenses for Christmas alms or communal dinners for their apprentices and journeymen. This sharing of resources during a crucial time of scarcity provided a vital social safety net and strengthened bonds within the guild structure. Furthermore, the Christmas period was a time when apprentices might receive small gifts or a holiday from their masters. While not the elaborate exchange of presents we know today, these were tokens of goodwill and recognition within the hierarchical craft system. The cessation of formal work allowed for more informal social interaction, fostering mentorship and community. The guilds, therefore, woven into the fabric of urban medieval life, contributed a secular layer of ritual and festivity to Christmastide, balancing solemn worship with civic pride, charitable deeds, and community bonding, all culminating in a tangible sense of shared celebration and mutual support among their members. As the Christmas Eve Vespers concluded, a profound transformation occurred across the medieval landscape. The world, already plunged into the annual grip of winter darkness, became even more intensely dark as artificial light sources were minimal. This was an era before streetlights, widespread glass windows, or readily available uniform illumination. Moving through the medieval world after dusk, especially on a moonless winter night, meant navigating an environment of profound shadows, a stark contrast to our electrically lit present. Imagine stepping out of a church or hall into the inky blackness, the only guidance provided by the occasional pinprick of starlight, a faint glow from a distant hearth, or the unsteady flicker of a carried lantern. This unlit world deeply shaped medieval perception and daily life. Travel after sunset was hazardous, fraught with real dangers from uneven terrain, wild animals or bandits. Even familiar paths became treacherous. Night was a time for sleep, for stories told around the fire, and for the dominance of the imagination. A realm where folklore and supernatural beliefs held sway. Accounts from travellers and local chronicles frequently mention the dangers and psychological impact of nocturnal journeys. Yet, Christmas Eve and the subsequent Christmastide nights were also times of extraordinary atmospheric beauty. The scattered lights emanating from homes and churches stood out with piercing clarity against the boundless dark. The absence of light pollution meant that the starlit sky would have been breathtakingly visible, a truly awe-inspiring spectacle. This natural illumination would have provided a powerful backdrop to the spiritual narrative of Christmas, particularly the imagery of the Star of Bethlehem. For a population deeply connected to the natural world and the rhythms of the cosmos, the journey through the unlit world carried both trepidation and wonder. This deep darkness also underscored the symbolism of Christ as the light of the world. The religious services, the midnight masses, were literally a journey from darkness to light, both physically and spiritually. The warm glow of candles and the collective body heat within the church offered a tangible refuge from the biting cold and the pervasive shadows outside. Thus, the starlight cutting through the vast darkness was not just a celestial phenomenon, but a constant, potent reminder of the themes of hope and redemption that permeated the medieval Christmas celebration, making the eventual return of the sun and the spiritual light of Christ all the more poignant. Against the profound quiet of the unlit medieval night, the carols of Christmas, though different from those we know today, played a vital role in animating the festive period. The term carol in the Middle Ages referred less to a distinctively Christian song and more to a communal dance song, often performed in a circle. These early carols frequently had pagan origins, celebrating the seasons and fertility, before being gradually adapted and reinterpreted with Christian themes by the Church. Manuscript collections such as the Selden Carol Book, early 15th century, contain some of the earliest surviving notated English carols, showcasing their often simple, repetitive structure and communal nature. Imagine a group huddling together, perhaps after a communal meal, singing these songs to ward off the chill and the pervasive psychological impact of long, dark nights. Their voices, often unsupported by instruments beyond a drum or pipe, would have carried on the frigid air, a human sound pushing back against the silence. This communal singing was a social adhesive, strengthening bonds within families and villages. It was a form of shared entertainment, emotional release, and a way to pass on stories and traditions in an oral culture. However, this warmth of human connection was constantly challenged by the bite of the northern wind. Medieval Christmas was truly a cold affair. Heating technology was rudimentary, primarily open fires or braziers, which made only a slight difference in drafty stone castles and timber-framed homes with poor insulation. Even indoor gatherings would necessitate heavy clothing, furs, and the closeness of bodies for warmth. Records from aristocratic households, like those of Henry III, often detail extensive purchases of extra firewood and charcoal for the winter months, indicative of the constant battle against the cold. The Christmas season, therefore, existed in a stark duality: the internal warmth of human interaction, shared food, and communal song battling against the exterior environmental harshness. The carol's faint cry was a defiant statement against the biting wind and the silent, cold landscape. It symbolized resilience, the human spirit's capacity for joy and community even in the face of profound discomfort and potential danger. These simple vocalizations, carried on the crisp winter air, were not merely entertainment. They were expressions of hope, a collective affirmation of life and continuity during the year's greatest challenge. Despite the looming spectre of winter scarcity, the days leading up to Christmas were punctuated by sporadic instances of feasting, particularly among the wealthier segments of society. The concept of feasting before the feast refers not to a pre-Christmas indulgence in modernity's terms, but rather to the strategic consumption of fresh produce from the autumn's bountiful harvest that could not be preserved until Christmas Day itself. This often meant enjoying foods that would otherwise spoil, a pragmatic approach to maximizing the harvest. For the aristocratic household, with its substantial land holdings and extensive resources, the period following the autumn slaughter was crucial. Livestock, often fattened over the summer, would be culled to reduce winter fodder demands. While much of the meat would be salted, smoked, or dried for long-term storage, some would be consumed fresh. Imagine bustling kitchen courtyards where fresh game, deer, boar, various fowl, brought in from the Lord's lands, might be enjoyed in the weeks preceding Christmas. This was a privilege of status, a demonstration of wealth and access to resources that insulated them, to a degree, from the starker realities facing the peasantry. However, even for these households, the bounty was relative to preservation technology. It was less about unlimited supply and more about the careful management of perishable goods. Grain, the most crucial staple, was meticulously stored, its usage often strictly controlled. Dairy products, if still available from late lactating animals, might appear, but fresh milk and cheese were far rarer in winter than in summer. Orchard fruits, if not dried or made into ciders, would be long gone. Medieval household accounts, such as those from the Savoy Palace in London, attest to large quantities of provisions, but these were intended to last an entire household, sometimes numbering hundreds, through months of winter. For the vast majority, the peasant class, any feasting before Christmas would have been modest indeed. Perhaps a slightly more generous portion of fresh bread, or the inclusion of a rare vegetable preserved in a root cellar, would constitute a pre-feast luxury. The reality was that even a scarce harvest bounty had to be rationed with extreme care. This distinction is vital. The images of endless medieval banquets often apply to a minuscule fraction of the population. For most, the upcoming Christmas Day feast, however humble, would represent a truly significant occasion, a temporary lifting of the ever-present pressure of hunger and a brief yet meaningful taste of relative abundance. While sustenance was a practical imperative, the consumption of alcoholic beverages during Christmastide offered a crucial psychological and social release. Mead, beer, and ale were fundamental components of the medieval diet, far safer to drink than often contaminated water. However, during the festive season, their consumption escalated, acting as a lubricant for social interaction and a producer of warmth and good cheer. Mead, a fermented honey drink, held a particular, almost mythical status, its sweet sting a potent symbol of indulgence, especially during winter celebrations. Imagine gathered villagers or a lord's household, the atmosphere thick with wood smoke and shared body heat, the communal jug of ale or mead circulating. This was a time for storytelling, for sharing old tales that harked back to ancestral traditions, reinforcing collective memory and identity. These stories, oral traditions passed down through generations, range from heroic epics and moral fables to ribald jokes and accounts of local lore. They were entertainment, education, and social glue all in one, particularly vital in a pre-literate society. Scholars like Carol G. Silver, in her work on medieval folklore, highlight the importance of these oral traditions in shaping medieval worldviews and transmitting cultural knowledge. The raucous laughter that often punctuated these sessions was, in itself, a form of communal release. After months of strenuous labor and the anxieties of survival, the Christmas period provided a sanctioned opportunity for uninhibited merriment and the breaking down of social barriers, albeit temporarily. While strict social hierarchies were maintained, the festive atmosphere could permit a degree of license. Lords might eat with their household staff on occasion, and games, singing and dancing would transcend some daily social distinctions. These gatherings were not without their structure. Often, specific games were played, riddles posed, or songs expected. The performances were as much about participation as professional entertainment, fostering a sense of shared experience. The sweet sting of mead and the raucous laughter of old tales were thus inseparable elements of the medieval Christmas experience. They served to bind communities together, providing solace and joy during the longest, coldest nights, and reinforcing the idea that even in times of scarcity and hardship, the human spirit could find ways to celebrate life, connection, and the enduring power of shared history. Stepping into a medieval church, particularly during the winter months, presented a striking sensorial experience. The interior would have been a realm of pervasive gloom, far removed from the brightly lit sanctuaries of today. Light, provided primarily by small unglazed windows high in the walls and a sparse array of candles, struggled to penetrate the vast Gothic spaces or the simpler Romanesque interiors. This inherent darkness, however, served to heighten the impact of localized light sources, drawing the eye towards the glimmer of holy images and the flickering drama of the altar. The architecture itself amplified this atmosphere. The soaring arches and heavy stone construction of cathedrals, or the more modest proportions of parish churches, were designed to evoke awe and humble the individual before the divine. The gloom was not accidental. It was a deliberate choice, intended to foster contemplation and underscore the spiritual battle against literal and metaphorical darkness. As art historians like Otto von Simpson have argued in their analysis of Gothic cathedrals, the carefully controlled lighting was integral to the sacred experience, drawing attention to the divine mystery. Within this solemn darkness, the holy images, statues, painted altarpieces, and vibrant stained glass windows became focal points of brilliant, if localized, luminosity. On Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, these images, particularly those depicting the Nativity, would have been specially adorned. Imagine a wooden carving of the Madonna and Child, perhaps painted in jewel tones, catching the precise glimmer of a dozen candles, creating an almost incandescent effect. The figures in stained glass, depicting biblical scenes, would glow with an ethereal light when the weak winter sun or interior sconces illuminated them, transforming narrative into vibrant, transcendent art. These holy images were not merely decorative. For a largely illiterate populace, they were vital educational tools, presenting the core tenets of the Christian faith in a visual, accessible language. During Christmastide, the focus on the Nativity, the adoration of the Magi, and the shepherd's visitation would have been particularly strong. The glimmer of these images offered a tangible connection to the sacred narrative, transforming the otherwise gloomy interior into a place of vivid spiritual instruction and profound emotional engagement. In this sense, the church's gloom provided the perfect canvas for the dramatic and hopeful illumination of its most sacred art. Within the dimly lit medieval church, another potent sensory experience permeated the atmosphere: the distinctive heavy scent of frankincense. This precious resin, imported from the Arabian Peninsula and North Africa, was not merely an aromatic. It was a potent symbol with deep theological significance, literally rising in smoke as prayers ascended to heaven. The use of incense in Christian liturgy dates back to the early centuries and was specifically prescribed for solemn celebrations like Christmas Mass. Parish records and liturgical instructions detailing the preparation for high feast days frequently mention the considerable quantities of incense required, particularly for cathedrals and monastic chapters. This pervasive fragrance was intrinsically linked to the concept of sin and redemption, a central preoccupation of medieval life. The air, heavy with incense, served to purify the sacred space, creating an environment deemed worthy for divine presence. But it also evoked a more personal spiritual cleansing. For the medieval mind, the world was fraught with temptation and the constant threat of eternal damnation. Confession and penance were regular, burdensome practices, and the threat of hellfire was a very real existential fear. The Nativity story offered the promise of salvation, but it was an offer predicated on acknowledgement of one's fallen state. Imagine the congregant, standing or kneeling in the frigid air, enveloped by the swirling sweet smoke. The sensory experience, combined with the Latin chants and the priest's sermon, would have been deeply immersive. The weight of sin was not an abstract concept. It was a tangible burden carried daily. The rituals of Christmas Mass, however, offered a momentary reprieve, a communal act of seeking forgiveness and rededication. The smoke, curling upwards, symbolized prayers and penitence, carrying the burdens of the faithful towards a merciful God. This dramatic interplay of light, scent, and spiritual doctrine reveals a profound aspect of medieval Christmas. It was not just a time of joyful celebration, but a period of intense spiritual introspection and a collective reaffirmation of faith in the face of what was perceived as a sinful world. The scent of incense was a physical manifestation of this spiritual journey, a reminder of both human imperfection and divine grace, providing a vital bridge between the terrestrial gloom and the hope of heavenly light. Even in the rigid, often harsh structures of medieval society, children found pockets of play, and Christmastide, with its respite from labour for many families, offered more opportunities for youthful diversion. Absent the manufactured toys and electronic gadgets of today, medieval children's games were intrinsically tied to their immediate environment, fueled by ingenuity and often a healthy dose of imagined grandeur. Imagine a group of children wrapped in rough woolens, kicking a pig's bladder, one of the earliest forms of football, across a muddy village green or a frozen pond. or picture them wielding sticks as swords, reenacting battles, or constructing rudimentary castles from stones and branches. These were not simply pastimes. They were crucial developmental activities. They honed physical skills, fostered social cooperation, and allowed for the expression of creativity within the constraints of their world. Archaeological excavations of medieval sites occasionally uncover small, crudely fashioned clay or wooden toys, suggesting that simple playthings were not entirely absent, but handmade and perishable. The imagined grandeur of their games was particularly potent during Christmastide. The adult world's rituals, the pageantry of the church, the feasts of the Lord, the communal singing, all provided inspiration. Children might mimic the solemn processions, perform their own mini-mystery plays, or engage in mock banquets with carefully collected scraps. The celebration of the boy bishop, a popular medieval custom detailed in many historical accounts, perfectly illustrates this blend of play and social role reversal. For a period, often from December 6th, St. Nicholas Day, until Holy Innocents' Day, December 28th, a choir boy or schoolboy would be elected to take on the vestments and authority of a bishop, presiding over services, leading processions, and even delivering sermons. This temporary inversion of hierarchy, while sanctioned, offered a powerful and often humorous commentary on adult society. These spontaneous and organized forms of play were not just moments of unbridled joy for medieval children. They were also vital learning experiences. They instilled community values, prepared them for adult roles, and provided a necessary outlet for youthful energy within a world that demanded early maturity and contribution. The mud and sticks were their canvases, their imaginations the only limit, creating a vibrant, albeit often unnoticed, layer of festive activity beneath the adult revelry. Childhood in medieval Europe, particularly for the vast peasant majority, was undeniably shaped by what we would consider today to be harsh lessons. Life expectancy was significantly lower, with high infant and child mortality rates. A third of children might not survive to adulthood. Disease, hunger, and accidental injury were constant threats. Children, often indistinguishable from small adults in their clothing, were expected to contribute to household labor from a young age, learning necessary skills for survival. For girls, this involved domestic chores, spinning, and caring for younger siblings. For boys, it meant assisting in the fields, with livestock, or in a master's craft shop. Educational records from the period, such as those detailing apprenticeship contracts, illuminate the rigorous and often unforgiving training expected. While noble children might receive formal schooling at monasteries or through tutors, peasant children learned through direct participation and imitation in the daily grind. The concept of a protected, prolonged childhood for play and formal education was largely a privilege of the elite, and even then, often intertwined with rigorous training in weaponry, courtly etiquette, or religious doctrine. Yet, within this demanding existence, the Christmas season offered a vital counterpoint: the joy of simple pleasures. The mere cessation of daily agricultural labor was a profound relief. For a few days, or even a couple of weeks, the relentless pressure to produce and survive eased slightly. This time allowed for extended family gatherings, communal meals that were slightly more abundant, and the rare opportunity for leisure. The games and storytelling previously discussed were not mere diversions but cherished moments of collective enjoyment. Imagine the delight of a child finally being allowed to taste a piece of roasted meat or a special honey cake during a Christmas feast, a rare treat in a diet primarily composed of gruel and bread, the sound of their parents and neighbors joining in a carol, the warmth of a crowded room, the flickering firelight on familiar faces. These were significant sources of happiness. Such moments, simple by modern standards, were deeply cherished against the backdrop of hard work and constant insecurity. They underscored the medieval understanding of joy, not as a continuous state of comfort, but as a precious, transient experience, profoundly appreciated because of its scarcity. The harsh lessons of life made the simple pleasures of Christmastide all the more poignant and memorable. Central to the medieval Christmas feast, indeed to medieval life itself, stood the monumental importance of grain, and by extension, the miller. The sound of the miller's wheel, a rhythmic symphony of stone grinding against stone, was a constant, reassuring presence in most medieval communities, signifying the transformation of raw grain into the flour that formed the bedrock of daily existence. This was especially true during Christmastide, when increased preparations for celebratory baking placed enormous, yet vital, demands on the mill. Across Europe, mills, whether water-powered or wind-powered, were technological marvels of their age. A watermill, for instance, harnessed the kinetic energy of a flowing river or stream to turn a massive horizontal or vertical wheel, which in turn powered the heavy millstones. These stones, typically made of hard, porous rock like granite or chert, slowly revolved, crushing the grain between them. The efficiency and reliability of a village mill were critical infrastructure, dictating the very sustenance of the local population. Charters and manorial records frequently detail the operation, upkeep, and even disputes over milling rights, underscoring its immense economic and social value. Imagine the miller, his clothing perpetually dusted white with flour, overseeing this powerful, noisy machinery. The process was both art and science, requiring careful adjustment of the millstones to achieve the desired fineness of flour, a skill passed down through generations. Medieval accounts, such as excerpts from Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, often depict millers as shrewd, sometimes dishonest figures, reflecting their crucial position and the power they wielded over a community's most fundamental resource. They were often wealthier than the average peasant due to the multure, a fee, usually a proportion of the grain milled, paid to the lord and, by extension, the miller. During periods of celebration like Christmastide, the mill would operate almost continuously. The demand for flour would surge as households prepared special breads, pastries, and other baked goods for the festivities. The grain, painstakingly harvested and stored in autumn, found its ultimate transformation here. The rhythmic rumble of the millstones, therefore, was not merely an industrial sound. It was the acoustic heartbeat of medieval survival, providing the very foundation upon which any feasting, humble or grand, during the Christmas season could be built. Without the miller's wheel, the promise of the feast remained just that, a promise. While the miller's wheel provided the sustenance, another ubiquitous sound underscored the resilience of medieval life, particularly during the harsh winter months: the weaver's steady hum. In virtually every household, from the humblest cottage to the grandest manor, the processing of fibrous materials, wool, flax, sometimes hemp, into textiles was a fundamental and continuous activity, a testament to the essential role of clothing and bedding for survival in a pre-industrial age. This domestic industry formed the very texture of survival. Imagine women and children, often gathered around the hearth for warmth and light, engaged in the laborious yet rhythmic tasks of preparing fibers and weaving, spinning, using a drop spindle or a simple spinning wheel, transformed raw wool or flax into thread. This thread was then painstakingly woven on a loom, a frame of varying complexity, to create fabric. The loom could be a small, portable setup for personal use, or a larger, stationary one for more extensive production. Archaeological finds at medieval dwelling sites frequently include spindle whorls and loom weights, direct evidence of this pervasive domestic activity. Clothing was not a matter of fashion. It was literally a matter of life and death in the often brutally cold European climate. Layers of wool, sometimes supplemented by linen undergarments, provided the vital insulation against the elements. The quality and quantity of one's clothing directly impacted their ability to withstand winter's bite and prevent illness. Beyond personal attire, woven goods were essential for warmth within homes. Blankets, tapestries for insulation against cold stone walls, and sacks for storage. During the Christmas season, with its temporary lull in agricultural work, weaving and spinning would often intensify, particularly during the long, dark evenings. This provided not only necessary clothing and warmth for the coming year, but also potential surplus for trade or as gifts. The quiet, persistent hum of the loom and the gentle whir of the spinning wheel were sounds of industry, dedication, and foresight. They represented ongoing production, a continuous effort to provide for the household's most basic needs, ensuring protection from the environment. They underscore that even amidst the spiritual and communal celebrations of Christmastide, the fundamental necessity of self-sufficiency and preparation for survival remained a constant woven into the very fabric of medieval life. Amidst the seasonal lull of agricultural work and the domestic hum of spinning wheels, another distinct sound resonated in medieval villages and towns: the rhythmic clang of the blacksmith's hammer. The forge, with its intense heat and showers of sparks, stood as a beacon of industry and an essential hub for any community. The blacksmith was a master of metal, transforming raw iron into the indispensable tools, weapons, and implements upon which medieval life depended. During the Christmastide period, while some trades slowed, the blacksmith's work often shifted in focus but remained vital. Imagine the blacksmith silhouetted against the roaring fire of his forge, muscles straining as he skillfully manipulated glowing hot metal. His workshop, a scene of concentrated effort and palpable heat, must have been a welcome respite from the winter cold for those waiting on repairs or new fittings. The tools he created were not just necessities. They were symbols of progress and human ingenuity. From plowshares that tilled the fields to nails that held buildings together, from horseshoes that enabled travel to swords that defended kingdoms, iron was the backbone of medieval society. Metallurgical analysis of medieval artifacts provides clear evidence of sophisticated ironworking techniques for the era. The forging process itself was a profound demonstration of skill and endurance, heating the iron to temperatures exceeding 1000 degrees Celsius, then shaping it on an anvil with precisely timed, powerful hammer blows. This work generated not only sparks and sweat, but also a profound understanding of material properties. The blacksmith was a specialist, often one of the few truly skilled artisans in a small community. His craft was passed down through generations, often within families, guarded by tradition and experience. During the winter months, when outdoor work was limited, the blacksmith might undertake more repairs, sharpen existing tools, or craft household items. For Christmas, bespoke items might be commissioned for wealthier patrons, decorative ironwork for a manor gate, or specific kitchen utensils for a castle. His labor, however, continued to underpin society's functioning. The blacksmith's hammer, therefore, was a symbol of strength and stability, a constant reminder that even in times of celebration, the fundamental processes of creation and maintenance necessary for the community's survival and future prosperity continued unabated, ensuring that the necessary implements would be ready for the spring thaw and the resumption of intense labor. Flowing from the foundational work of the blacksmith, a more specialized artisan emerged, the armorer. Unlike the generalist blacksmith, who forged a broad spectrum of iron goods, the armorer dedicated his craft solely to the creation and maintenance of armor and weaponry. His workshop, while sharing the heat and sparks of the forge, possessed a unique focus, yielding objects designed for protection and combat rather than daily toil. The armorer's art, especially the cold promise of steel, represented a direct link to the martial realities of feudal society, even during seasons of peace like Christmastide. Imagine the armorer, perhaps in a bustling urban environment like Milan or Nuremberg, renowned centers for armor production. Here, the clatter of hammers against steel would be a more refined, deliberate sound than the blacksmith's heavy blows. Mail, chainmail, was painstakingly woven ring by ring, a process often involving multiple assistants. Later, plate armor, requiring sophisticated shaping, tempering, and articulation, demanded immense skill. These items were not simply functional, they were often works of art, intricately designed for both protection and the projection of status. Armor pieces, from helmets to gauntlets, underwent rigorous processes of hammering, annealing, quenching, and tempering to achieve the ideal balance of hardness and resilience. Records of royal households and noble estates frequently detail expenditures on armor, upkeep, and commissions for new suits. The cold promise of steel refers to the inherent duality of these objects. Steel, when properly wrought, offered unparalleled protection, a visible and tangible shield against the brutal realities of medieval warfare. Yet, it also promised destruction, an instrument of power and violence. For the knights and soldiers who wore it, armor was their uniform, their livelihood, and their very identity. Their effectiveness in battle, and often their survival, depended on the armorer's meticulous craftsmanship. During Christmastide, while large-scale campaigning typically ceased due to weather, the armorer's work continued. Maintenance was constant. Rust was a perpetual enemy of steel. Repairs were always needed from previous skirmishes. And for those with the means, special commissions for new or upgraded pieces might be made, perhaps as gifts, or in preparation for spring campaigns or upcoming jousts. The armorer's art, therefore, was a consistent reminder of the underlying military structure of medieval society, a quiet testament to the ever-present need for defense and projection of power, even as the bells of Christmas tolled a message of peace. While village life centered on the church and modest domestic activities, the Christmas season in a lord's castle or manor house was a spectacle of centralized power and carefully orchestrated festivity. The great hall, the architectural and social heart of any substantial residence, became the primary stage for these celebrations. These vast, often drafty spaces, designed for communal dining and official gatherings, resonated with both the echoes of power and the chill of obligation. Imagine the great hall on Christmas Day, adorned with evergreen boughs and perhaps some hastily hunted game. Smoke from the central hearth would drift upwards, eventually escaping through a vent in the roof, filling the cavernous space with a warm, particulate haze. Despite the roaring fires, significant portions of the hall would remain cold, a constant reminder of medieval heating limitations. Yet, it was in this setting that the Lord would receive his tenants, vassals, and household, reaffirming his authority and dispensing justice and largesse. Household accounts and contemporary chronicles, such as Froissart's Chronicles, detail the elaborate preparations and scale of these aristocratic celebrations. The Christmas feast in the Great Hall was not merely a meal, it was a carefully choreographed theatrical event. The placement of each individual at the high table or lower benches rigidly reflected their social standing. The quality and type of food served, the presence of specific spices, and the entertainment provided all reinforced the Lord's wealth and status. However, this display of power came with a corresponding chill of obligation. Feudal society was built on a complex web of duties and reciprocal relationships. The Lord was expected to provide for his people, particularly during difficult times. During Christmastide, this obligation manifested in various ways: the provision of a feast, the distribution of alms to the poor, or the granting of privileges. It was a crucial period for renewing allegiances and maintaining social order. A lord who failed to adequately provide or entertain risked resentment and a weakening of his authority. Thus, the lavishness of the hall, the abundance of the food relative to the times, and the carefully managed bonhomie served a pragmatic purpose. They were not simply expressions of joy. They were calculated affirmations of social hierarchy and the Lord's responsibility to his dependents, ensuring stability for another year in a world where power was deeply personal and its maintenance a constant, active effort. Amidst the pageantry of the Great Hall, another figure held a unique, often precarious position: the jester or fool. Unlike the minstrel, who might offer music and epic recitations, the jester's role was to provide humor, often through satire, acrobatics, or witty observations. This was a crucial element of aristocratic Christmas entertainment. However, the jester's acts and the very nature of courtly merriment frequently contained a subtext of fearful merriment, a thin veneer masking underlying tensions and anxieties within the rigid hierarchy. Imagine the jester, perhaps in motley attire, capering before the high table. His gags could range from slapstick comedy to sharp, politically charged wit, often delivered in riddles or double entendres. Royal and noble household accounts, such as those of Edward I of England, record payments to jesters, indicating their established presence and value in courtly life. The jester was often one of the few individuals permitted to openly mock the powerful, to speak uncomfortable truths shielded by the cloak of foolishness. This unique license made them invaluable to a lord, allowing for a controlled release of social pressure and an unofficial channel for feedback, however indirectly delivered. However, this license was not absolute. The jester's position was inherently delicate, hovering between entertainment and insolence. A misjudged joke, a satire that cut too deep, could result in severe punishment, even death. This constant threat underpinned their performance, creating an atmosphere of fearful merriment, where laughter could quickly turn to silence. The Lord's favour was fleeting, and the jester's livelihood depended entirely on his ability to amuse without fundamentally offending. Beyond the jester, the entire atmosphere of aristocratic feasting could carry this undercurrent of fear. Rivalries between nobles, political machinations, and the ever-present threat of disease or war meant that even the most joyous celebrations were tinged with anxiety. The abundant food, though seemingly generous, might still be eyed with suspicion for poison. The boisterous games, while entertaining, could escalate into real aggression. Thus, the taste of fearful merriment wasn't merely a jester's carefully managed risk. It was an inherent quality of medieval court life, a constant awareness that power dynamics, personal grudges, and existential threats were never truly set aside, even at the height of seemingly unbounded Christmas revelry. The laughter, therefore, was often as much a defense mechanism as an expression of genuine joy. While the secular world celebrated Christmastide with varying degrees of feasting and merriment, within the hallowed, often cold and austere, walls of medieval convents and monasteries, the season took on a profoundly different character. Here, the rhythm of life was dictated not by seasonal revelry, but by the strictures of the rule, primarily that of St. Benedict, which emphasized a life of prayer, work, and communal living. The silence, stone, and the rhythm of devotion defined their Christmas. Imagine the interior of a convent chapel on Christmas Eve, where the only sounds are the rustle of habits, the soft shuffle of feet, and the Gregorian chant echoing against bare stone walls. Far from the boisterous laughter of the Lord's Hall, the atmosphere within a convent was one of focused contemplation and deep spiritual significance. The sisters, having already observed Advent, a period of fasting and heightened spiritual preparation, approached Christmas Day with an intensified schedule of prayer and liturgical services. Monastic chronicles, like the Annals of Barking Abbey or the records of the Poor Clares, provide insights into their structured daily lives, where prayer, manual labor, and study were meticulously balanced. The Christmas celebration in a convent was centered entirely on the birth of Christ. The emphasis was less on material abundance and more on spiritual richness. Special readings from the scriptures, an expanded liturgy, and the singing of matins, vigils, and Lord's morning prayer during the deep hours of the night would have marked the transition from Christmas Eve to Christmas Day. These were often performed by candlelight, creating pools of warm, dancing light that momentarily pushed back the pervasive darkness of the unheated stone structures. The silence was not an absence of sound, but a deliberate cultivation of an internal state conducive to prayer and meditation. The stone of the building served as a constant reminder of permanence, discipline, and separation from the secular world. The rhythm of devotion was the bedrock of their existence, an unbroken sequence of prayers, masses, and communal duties that structured every hour of the day and night. For the nuns, Christmas was a sublime expression of their vows, a communal affirmation of their faith, and a deep, personal connection to the nativity story, expressed through unwavering spiritual discipline rather than outward display. In this contemplative environment, the true meaning of Christmas for them lay in silent awe and profound gratitude. Within the monastic context, the sensory experience of Christmas extended beyond sight and sound to the subtle, yet potent, realm of scent. While the parish church might have been occasionally filled with the heavy perfume of frankincense, the convent often relied on more indigenous aromas, the herbal scents harvested and cultivated within their own enclosed gardens. These subtle fragrances, released from strewing herbs on floors or in simple sachets, contributed to an atmosphere of understated sanctity, emblematic of the quiet strength of faith pervading these institutions. Imagine the interior of a convent at Christmas, perhaps with sprigs of rosemary, lavender, or even bay laurel scattered across the stone floors of the chapel or refectory. These herbs, known for their cleansing and aromatic properties, would release their subtle essences as they were trod upon. Beyond their practical use as air fresheners in an era without modern sanitation, many herbs carried symbolic meanings in medieval Christian tradition. Rosemary, for instance, was often associated with remembrance, and its presence during Christmas could evoke memories of Christ's life and sacrifice. Botanical treatises and gardening manuals from medieval monastic libraries frequently list herbs cultivated for both medicinal and aromatic purposes. These herbal scents, in their quiet way, contributed to the convent's distinctive atmosphere, one of order, contemplation, and dedicated spirituality. They contrasted sharply with the more overt, often opulent, sensory displays of aristocratic Christmas celebrations. The simplicity of these natural fragrances reflected the Benedictine values of humility and poverty, reinforcing the focus on the internal spiritual journey rather than external pomp. The quiet strength of faith was the bedrock of convent life. For the men and women who chose the monastic path, Christmas was a reaffirmation of their commitment to a life devoted to God. It was a time when the spiritual joy of the Nativity was felt not through feasting and public display, but through prolonged prayer, meditation, and communal worship, all within the confines of their chosen, disciplined existence. The herbal scents, therefore, were more than just pleasant smells. They were an organic part of this spiritual ecosystem, contributing to an environment where devotion could flourish and where the profound meaning of Christmas could be deeply felt in a quiet yet incredibly powerful way. Their Christmas was a testament to the enduring power of internal conviction, demonstrating how a celebration of profound faith could manifest in practices far removed from the more boisterous public festivities. Beneath the layers of religious observance and festive cheer, the medieval Christmas existed alongside the constant, stark reality of human vulnerability. The harsh winter, with its cold, dampness, and reduced nutrition, inevitably brought sickness. This was the domain of the physician, a figure whose practice combined empirical knowledge, superstitious belief, and a reliance on divine intervention. His touch during Christmastide often involved a mixture of herbs, incantations, and a profound awareness of the inherent frailty of life. Imagine the physician, who might be an educated cleric, a barber surgeon, or a village wise woman, visiting a patient during the Christmas season. The air would be thick with a chill, and the patient's condition often precarious. Medieval medical theory, heavily influenced by Hippocratic and Galenic traditions, relied on the concept of the four humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Illness was attributed to an imbalance of these humours, requiring specific treatments to restore equilibrium. Medical texts like the Regimen Sanitatis Salernitanum offered guidance on diet, exercise, and the properties of various herbs for maintaining health. Herbal remedies formed the cornerstone of medical practice. These were not just folk cures. Many possessed genuine pharmacological properties. For example, willow bark, containing salicylates, the active ingredient in aspirin, was used for fever and pain. Thyme was employed for respiratory ailments. The physician would prescribe specific concoctions, teas, poultices, or decoctions, often using herbs gathered and dried from summer, or those still available in monastic gardens. Yet, alongside these practical applications, incantations and prayers were frequently employed. Illness was sometimes attributed to supernatural causes, demonic influence, or divine punishment, making spiritual remedies an integral part of healing. Charms, blessings, and the recitation of biblical passages were not uncommon. demonstrating the profound interplay between medicine and faith. The frailty of life was never more apparent than during the winter months. Poor sanitation, crowded living conditions, and inadequate nutrition created fertile ground for epidemics. Fevers, respiratory infections, and gastrointestinal illnesses were rampant, and without antibiotics or advanced surgical techniques, death was a frequent visitor. Even during Christmas, when spirits might be lifted, the shadow of mortality lingered. The physician's role, therefore, was not always to cure, but often to comfort, to ease suffering, and to guide the transition between life and death. His combined approach, part medic, part spiritual advisor, reflected a societal understanding where physical and spiritual well-being were inextricably linked, especially when confronted with the ever-present fragility of human existence. Amidst the medieval Christmas, the challenges facing medical practitioners were immense, often leading to what we might term the healer's despair. With rudimentary understanding of anatomy, physiology, and germ theory, even the most dedicated physician frequently confronted illnesses that defied all remedies. Contagious diseases, unexplained fevers, and the insidious creep of gangrene were commonplace, and outcomes were often beyond human control. This despair was a heavy burden, particularly when facing the suffering of children or entire communities during winter epidemics. Imagine a healer having exhausted their limited pharmacopoeia, perhaps a concoction of feverfew and willow bark, or a strong purgative, and seeing no improvement in a patient's condition. The lack of effective treatments for many common ailments meant that every medical encounter was a gamble. Records from medieval hospitals, often attached to monasteries or cathedrals, paint a stark picture of the limited success rates. While they provided care and spiritual comfort, their ability to medically intervene was severely circumscribed. This reality led to a pervasive sense of powerlessness, a constant reminder of the limits of medieval science. Yet, within this desperate context, there often lay hope in a simple poultice. While grand cures were rare, localized treatments derived from generations of empirical observation could offer genuine relief and contribute to healing. A poultice, typically a soft, moist mass of herbs or other substances applied to the body, was a common and often effective remedy for localized pain, inflammation, or infection. Herbs like plantain, known for its drawing properties, or marshmallow for its soothing mucilage, might be crushed and mixed with warm water, honey, or even wine, then applied to wounds, sores, or aching joints. This simple act, the careful preparation and application of a poultice, represented not only an attempt at physical healing, but also offered profound psychological comfort. It was a tangible act of care, a demonstration of human intention to alleviate suffering. For both the healer and the patient, it embodied hope, the belief that something could be done, that nature's remedies, guided by prayer, might effect a change. In a world where medical efficacy was often limited and despair a close companion, the quiet effectiveness of a simple poultice became a small yet powerful testament to human resilience and the enduring instinct to heal, providing vital solace amidst the harsh realities of medieval winter and the ever-present threat of disease. Amidst the selective warmth and planned festivities of medieval Christmastide, a stark counterpoint persisted in the cold, unyielding reality of poverty. The beggar's plea was a constant sound in medieval towns and outside manor gates, particularly poignant during the winter months. For those without land, family support, or guild affiliation, life was a daily struggle for basic survival, and Christmas, despite its charitable overtones, could often amplify their suffering on the cold pavement. Imagine the streets of a medieval town, bustling with festive activity, yet lined with individuals in threadbare clothes, huddled against the biting wind. The medieval social fabric, while having established systems of charity through the church and some guilds, was not designed to eliminate poverty, but rather to mitigate its harshest effects and frame it within a theological context of Christian duty. The poor were seen as embodying Christ, and giving alms was a path to salvation. However, this did not translate into universal compassion or guaranteed relief. The sheer numbers of the indigent could be overwhelming, especially in urban centres. Records from almshouses and urban charities, such as those maintained by the Bridge House estates in London, show a continuous, high demand for assistance. Many beggars were the old, the infirm, the widowed, or those displaced by famine, war, or economic upheaval. Their presence was deeply uncomfortable for the more fortunate, and while some practiced genuine charity, the sting of indifference was a common experience. Urban ordinances often attempted to regulate begging, distinguishing between deserving and undeserving poor, and sometimes expelling beggars from city limits. During Christmastide, charitable giving traditionally increased. Lords might distribute leftover food from their feasts. Monastic houses would often open their doors, and wealthy individuals might offer alms. This was often driven by religious obligation and public display, as much as genuine altruism. These acts, while providing brief succor, rarely addressed the systemic issues of poverty. For many beggars, even during this season of goodwill, the cold pavement remained their bed, and the fleeting kindness of strangers was their only hope. The contrast between the celebrated abundance within palaces and churches and the grinding hunger and exposure faced by the poor was a visceral reality of medieval Christmas, a stark reminder that even the most sacred feast could not completely banish the societal inequalities that defined the age. Despite the harsh realities and the sting of indifference often faced by the poor, the medieval Christmas season was also characterized by a heightened sense of charity, a spark of communal responsibility deeply rooted in Christian doctrine. This period was seen as an opportunity for the more fortunate to fulfill their religious obligations by helping those less able to help themselves, fostering a sense of the shared burden of existence within the community. Imagine the doors of a wealthy household or a monastery temporarily flung open, allowing a stream of the needy to enter. The distribution of alms, food, clothing, or small coins was a common practice. Lords might grant permission for their tenants to collect firewood from their forests or provide a communal meal. Monasteries, with their charitable missions, often ran infirmaries and guest houses, offering shelter and succor, especially during the harsh winter. Records from institutions such as Westminster Abbey detail the systematic provision of bread, ale, and money to paupers on significant feast days, including Christmas. This was not merely arbitrary generosity. It was an ingrained component of the Church's teachings, echoing biblical injunctions to care for the poor and vulnerable. The motivation for giving was multifaceted. For the wealthy, it was a means of earning spiritual merit, a path to salvation. For the Church, it was a central tenet of its social doctrine and an assertion of its moral authority. But for individuals in smaller communities, it often stemmed from a more immediate, localized sense of empathy and mutual support. In a society without formal welfare systems, interdependence was not just a moral ideal, but a practical necessity. A good harvest for one might mean a small surplus to share with a neighbor whose crops had failed. This shared burden of existence was particularly resonant during Christmas, symbolizing the humble birth of Christ among the poor. Even those of modest means might contribute, however little, to a common fund for the truly destitute. These acts of charity, while sometimes fleeting, were crucial. They fostered a sense of community, reinforced social ties, and provided critical assistance during the deadliest time of year. The spark of charity, therefore, was more than just an isolated act. It was a societal attempt to bridge the chasm of inequality, to infuse the festive season with a genuine, if often insufficient, commitment to collective welfare, reminding everyone that in the deepest winter, human kindness offered a different kind of warmth. While the majority of medieval life was localized, Christmastide, particularly in urban centers, offered glimpses into a much wider, interconnected world. The merchant's stall, even in the depths of winter, was a hub of activity, a vibrant sensory experience that brought the exotic to the everyday. Here, two powerful forces, the allure of exotic spices and the pragmatic glint of trade, converged, shaping the feasting and gift-giving traditions of the wealthier classes. Imagine the pungent sweet aromas emanating from carefully guarded sacks and boxes, peppercorns from India, cinnamon from Ceylon, cloves from the Moluccas. These weren't local products. They were precious commodities, transported across vast distances by sea and land, often changing hands multiple times and incurring significant costs and risks. The price of these spices reflected their arduous journey and their perceived value. For instance, in 14th century England, a pound of white pepper could cost as much as a sheep. Merchant guilds, such as the Grocers' Company of London, meticulously regulated the import and sale of these items, underscoring their economic significance. The glint of trade was visible everywhere. Coins, often minted from silver or gold, exchanged hands for goods whose origins lay thousands of miles away. Beyond spices, merchants traded in fine silks from China, valuable furs from the steppes, intricate tapestries from Flanders, and superior wine from Gascony. These luxury items, displayed enticingly, served to enhance the status of both the merchant and the consumer. For the medieval elite, the inclusion of exotic spices in their Christmas feast was a powerful declaration of wealth, indicating not just access to money, but also to vast trade networks. This trade was not simply about luxury. It was a complex economic engine. Venice, Genoa, and later the Hanseatic League cities were integral to connecting Europe with these distant markets. Seasonal fairs and markets, though perhaps less frequent in the dead of winter, would feature dedicated stalls where these goods could be purchased. Christmas, a time for conspicuous consumption among the nobility and wealthy burghers, naturally spurred demand for such items. The merchant stall, therefore, acted as a miniature portal, drawing distant lands and cultures into the heart of medieval Christmas celebrations, showcasing the global connections that even then underpinned local tradition, demonstrating that the appetite for luxury and the profit motive transcended seasonal boundaries and geographical limitations. The marketplace during Christmastide, even in the depths of winter, was a symphony of sounds and scents. Dominating this sonic landscape was often the haggler's voice, a constant interplay of negotiation and persuasion that defined medieval commerce. The purchase of any valuable commodity, particularly those from distant lands, was rarely a straightforward transaction of fixed prices. Instead, it was a ritual of bargaining, reflecting the fluidity of value and the personalized nature of trade. Imagine the merchant bundle of costly spices at his side, engaging with a prospective buyer. The scene would be characterized by a back-and-forth exchange, each party attempting to secure the most favorable terms. This haggling was not seen as impolite. Rather, it was an expected and integral part of the buying process, a test of wit and resolve. Merchants sometimes traveled far and wide, often making their way to medieval fairs, which, though less frequent in winter, still offered significant opportunities for trade before the complete cessation of movement. Historical city archives and guild records often document rules surrounding fair trade practices, yet the art of the bargain remained central to individual transactions. Accompanying the human drama of negotiation was the rich sensory experience provided by the fragrance of distant lands. It was an olfactory tapestry woven from exotic spices, rare perfumes, and preserved fruits. Imagine the distinct, sweet and spicy notes of cinnamon and cloves intermingling with the earthy aroma of ginger or the subtle warmth of nutmeg. These scents were not just pleasant, they were evocative. They spoke of long, perilous journeys across deserts and oceans, of bustling foreign markets, and of the vast, unknown world beyond Europe's borders. For people whose worlds were often confined to their village or town, these fragrances offered a brief, intoxicating encounter with the exotic. These imported goods were more than just commodities. They were status symbols. The ability to afford and display spices, fine textiles, or exotic fruits at one's Christmas feast was a clear indicator of wealth and social standing. The sophisticated palates of the nobility, as evidenced in medieval cookery books like the 14th century Le Viandier, heavily relied on a wide array of foreign spices to transform domestic ingredients. Thus, the haggler's voice and the fragrance of distant lands together painted a vivid picture of medieval commerce during Christmastide, a dynamic, competitive arena where the pursuit of luxury and profit brought the sensory richness of the wider world directly into the heart of the festive season. Beyond the bustling marketplaces and the echoing great halls, the most enduring and perhaps most historically resonant image of Christmas links directly to the stable's warmth. This was not merely a romanticized biblical setting. It was a deeply familiar reality for medieval people, whose lives were intricately intertwined with domesticated animals. The comforting smells of hay, the rhythmic sound of horse breath, and the constant rhythm of labor associated with animal husbandry were everyday experiences for the vast majority. Imagine stepping into such a stable on a cold winter's night. The air, though pungent with animal scent, would offer a tangible warmth, a stark contrast to the biting cold outside. The collective body heat of horses, oxen, sheep, and even pigs, combined with the insulating properties of stored hay and straw, created a microclimate. This warmth was crucial for the survival of both animals and often humans who shared these spaces. Historical reconstructions of medieval farmsteads and archaeological evidence frequently indicate that human dwellings were often directly connected to, or even shared space with, animal stalls, maximizing shared warmth during severe winters. This practice underscores the symbiotic relationship between medieval humans and their animals. The sounds would be equally characteristic. The quiet munching of fodder, the soft stamping of hooves, the deep resonant exhales of horses and cattle. This was the rhythm of labor that underscored the daily life of the rural population. Even during Christmastide, animals required feeding, watering, and mucking out. For a peasant, the welfare of their animals, their plough team, their milk cow, their sheep for wool, was paramount, directly impacting their survival in the coming year. These were not just beasts of burden, they were capital, often representing a family's greatest asset. This daily reality imbued the nativity story with profound authenticity for medieval audiences. The image of the Christ child born in a stable surrounded by animals spoke directly to their lived experience. It was an image not of poverty and squalor, as might be perceived today, but of humble warmth, life, and the essential connection between man and beast. The stable, therefore, was not just a place of birth. It was a symbol of shared existence, illustrating the omnipresence of animal life and rural labor in shaping the spiritual and practical understanding of Christmas in the medieval world. It was an intimate space, rich with the primal warmth of living things, deeply familiar and profoundly symbolic. Amidst the localized comforts of the stable, the festive hall, and the convent walls, there also existed the less celebratory reality of the traveller's tale, particularly during the Christmas season. For peddlers, pilgrims, soldiers, and merchants, the long, arduous journeys across medieval Europe rarely ceased entirely, even with the onset of winter. The Christmas period, while offering pockets of hospitality, often brought greater challenges to those on the endless road ahead. Imagine a lone traveller, hunched against the biting wind, trudging along a muddy, ice-rutted track. Such journeys were inherently dangerous. Roads were poorly maintained, often little more than widened paths. Robbery was a constant threat, and the weather itself could be a deadly adversary, with blizzards, floods, or impassable ice common in winter. Contemporary accounts, such as guides for pilgrims or travel advisories from merchant trading houses, highlighted the severe risks and extensive preparations needed for winter travel. Horses often wore special shoes with studs for better grip, and humans bundled themselves in layers of wool and fur. Yet, travel was essential. Pilgrimages to holy sites like Canterbury or Santiago de Compostela might still be undertaken, albeit by the most devout and hardy. Merchants had to deliver goods from distant fairs or secure supplies for the coming year. Messengers carried vital dispatches between lords and monarchs. During Christmastide, the promise of hospitality at a monastery, a roadside inn, often basic and uncomfortable, or a friendly lord's castle might offer temporary respite. The Christmas season traditionally encouraged greater charity towards travellers, seeing them as potential representations of Joseph and Mary seeking shelter. However, for most, it was still an individual struggle against the elements and the perils of the landscape. The endless road ahead symbolized not just physical distance, but also the relentless effort required to navigate a pre-industrial world. The very concept of a journey, fraught with peril and uncertainty, was a central metaphor in medieval thought. The journey of life, the pilgrimage to salvation. The travellers encountered during Christmastide, perhaps seeking warmth and a meal at a village inn, were a poignant reminder of the broader human condition. The constant movement, the search for safety and sustenance, and the enduring hope for arrival, even as the cold, dark road stretched onward. Their tales, when shared by the fire, would have brought a touch of the wider world and a profound appreciation for the security and warmth of home to those gathered in celebration. The medieval landscape, especially during the long, dark nights of winter, was not solely populated by tangible elements, but also by the unseen forces of folklore and fear. Away from the church's protective embrace and the Lord's authority, often on the fringes of the village, lay a dwelling that sparked both fear and cautious hope. The witch's hut, This isolated cottage, characterized by its wisps of smoke, the palpable suspicion it engendered, and often the lingering scent of elderflower from its herbal remedies, existed at the intersection of pagan belief, folk medicine, and mounting Christian anxiety. Imagine a small, often dilapidated hut, perpetually shrouded in the smoke from its peat or wood fire, its windows, if any, small and dark. This was the dwelling of the village cunning woman or wise man, figures who occupied a complex space in medieval society. These individuals, often women who possessed extensive knowledge of local plants, natural remedies, and perhaps midwifery skills, were consulted for a range of ailments and personal problems beyond the scope of formal medicine or the church. Their practice, however, was inextricably linked with pre-Christian beliefs and practices, making them objects of both reliance and profound suspicion. The scent of elderflower, along with other herbs like mugwort, yarrow, or St. John's wort, would often hang about such a dwelling. These plants were not only used for healing, but also for protective charms, divinatory practices, and sometimes for warding off perceived ill luck or evil spirits. Manuscript herbals, such as the Taquinum sanitatis, document some of these uses, though folk practices were largely unwritten. The ambiguous nature of their craft, healing potentially interpreted as harmful magic, fueled the suspicion that simmered in the collective consciousness. While relied upon in times of illness or misfortune, especially when more conventional remedies failed, these figures were also easily blamed when things went wrong. During the Christmastide, a period when the veil between worlds was traditionally thin in pre-Christian belief, the activities at the witch's hut might intensify. People sought protection from winter maladies, blessings for the new year, or remedies for lingering fears. However, this same period, with its heightened Christian emphasis, also brought forth increased clerical condemnation of superstitious practices. Thus, the witch's hut stood as a potent symbol of the enduring tension between ingrained folk magic and the slowly but surely consolidating power of the church. It represented a world where ancient knowledge and burgeoning Christian dogma, fear, and hope continually clashed and coexisted, shaping the hidden corners of medieval belief during the sacred season. The medieval world was profoundly shaped by the whisper of superstition, a constant undercurrent that permeated daily life, particularly during the liminal and anxious days of winter and Christmastide. Far from being merely ignorant beliefs, superstitions were often pragmatic attempts to exert some control over an unpredictable and often hostile environment, offering a kind of comfort of the unknown, where scientific explanations were non-existent. Imagine a farmer anxiously observing the flight of birds or the length of the icicles, seeking portents for the coming year's harvest. Christmas, being the beginning of the new year in many medieval calendars, was ripe for such divinations. Popular beliefs included the idea that animals gained the power of speech on Christmas Eve, or that the quality of weather on Christmas Day would predict the next 12 months. These beliefs, documented in various folklore collections and occasional ecclesiastical condemnations, demonstrate an active attempt to find meaning and predictability in the natural world. The comfort of the unknown arose from the human need for explanations. When crops failed, or disease struck, or a child died, and scientific reasons were not understood, attributing events to fairies, spirits, or malefic magic provided a narrative framework, however grim. It offered a perceived, if illusory, sense of control. A protective charm, a blessing, or even a ritualistic offering could feel like an active step to safeguard one's family or crops, even if its efficacy was purely psychological. The Church, while condemning outright paganism and witchcraft, often found common ground with more benign forms of folk magic, incorporating certain elements into Christian ritual or reinterpreting them within a Christian framework. For example, veneration of saints often absorbed a local reverence for healing springs or sacred trees. During Christmastide, many superstitions centered on ensuring good luck for the coming year. Specific foods were eaten for prosperity. Certain tasks avoided to prevent misfortune. The burning of the Yule log, as previously discussed, was more than just a source of warmth. Its ashes were sometimes kept as a charm to protect against lightning or evil. This blend of explicit Christian dogma and ingrained ancient folk practices created a rich, often contradictory tapestry of belief. The whisper of superstition was not necessarily a challenge to faith, but often a parallel system, providing reassurance and a sense of agency in a world where ultimate control lay beyond human grasp, offering a deep, albeit unspoken, layer of meaning to the Christmas season. For the medieval nobility, Christmastide was not solely a period of feasting and religious devotion. It also offered opportunities for traditional aristocratic pursuits, chief among them, hunting. As the agricultural year paused, the hunt became a central activity, offering not only sport but also a crucial source of fresh meat for the winter table. The hunter's trail often followed the frozen earth, a path of silent pursuit across landscapes transformed by the grip of winter. Imagine a crisp winter morning, the breath of men and hounds steaming in the frigid air. The ground, hard and unyielding from frost, would carry the faintest scent of prey. Hunting was a highly ritualized and skilled activity, far removed from modern sport. It required extensive knowledge of animal behavior, tracking, and the handling of hounds, falcons, and often weapons like bows or spears. For the nobility, hunting was more than a pastime. It was a demonstration of martial prowess, a means of training for warfare, and a clear assertion of their dominion over the land and its resources. Records from royal forests and game parks across medieval Europe meticulously detail hunting seasons, the types of game pursued, and the elaborate rules governing these activities, underscoring their importance in feudal society. The silent pursuit often involved stalking deer, boar, or smaller game like hares and pheasants. The cold, still air of winter could make tracking easier, as footprints remained crisp on a thin layer of snow or frozen soil. The hunt was an immersive experience, demanding acute awareness of one's surroundings, the subtle sounds of the forest, and the direction of the wind. A successful hunt meant not only a lavish banquet, but also the assertion of a lord's prestige and his ability to provide for his household. Game meat, such as venison or wild boar, featured prominently in Christmas feasts, a testament to the success of the winter hunt. Beyond the practical necessity of food, the hunt during Christmastide also served a social function. It brought together the lord and his retinue, fostered camaraderie, and provided a structured outlet for masculine energy during a time of relative inactivity. The frozen earth became their arena, the silent pursuit a primal dance between man and beast, culminating in a festive celebration that was as much a display of power and provision as it was a moment of seasonal joy. The hunter's trail, therefore, represented an enduring aristocratic tradition that married necessity with pleasure, cementing social bonds and providing the choicest ingredients for the season's grandest tables. The culmination of the winter hunt would invariably lead to the feast. Whether taste of venison, or wild boar, or fowl, graced the tables of the nobility. This was not merely the highlight of a meal. It was a powerful symbol, a seasonal ritual embodying the cycle of life and death that underpinned medieval existence. For the elite, the consumption of game meat at Christmastide was a direct connection to their status, power, and mastery over the natural world. Imagine a grand hall filled with the rich aroma of roasted venison. The meat, perhaps marinated in wine and spices, served as the centerpiece of a multi-course meal, often accompanied by elaborate presentations known as sottelties, artistic and edible sculptures. Cookbooks from the period, such as the Form of Curie, contain numerous recipes for game, highlighting the preferred methods of preparation, often involving exotic spices to both flavor and preserve. The possession and consumption of such game were strictly regulated by forest laws, reinforcing the lord's hunting rights and his exclusive domain. For the common person, poaching could carry a death sentence. This celebratory consumption of game underscored the deeply ingrained cycle of life and death in the medieval consciousness. The animals, harvested from the lord's forests, had given their lives to sustain the community, particularly during the precarious winter months. Their death at the hunter's hand directly contributed to the lord's ability to host a lavish feast, a visible demonstration of his continued provision and strength. It was a tangible link to the wildness and abundance of nature, brought under human control for both sustenance and ceremony. Moreover, the act of feasting itself, particularly on such prize meat, was a powerful affirmation of life in a world where death was a constant, familiar presence. The feast was a moment of excess and abundance, a defiance of the scarcity and mortality that lurked outside the castle walls. It marked a temporary suspension of daily anxieties, a collective indulgence in the fruits of successful hunting and past harvests. The taste of venison, therefore, was far more than a culinary experience. It was a potent symbol of power, provision, and the continuous renewal of life within the unyielding cycle of existence, inextricably woven into the fabric of medieval Christmas, affirming both human mastery and dependence on the natural world. This profound connection to the sources of sustenance made the Christmas feast a deep, symbolic affirmation of life itself. While much of medieval Christmas involved communal celebration and practical survival, a quieter, more intellectual pursuit was unfolding within the monastic scriptoria and private studies of the educated elite. In the scribe's cell, meticulously crafted letters of ink were laid upon prepared parchment, often illuminated by the subtle glow of knowledge that permeated the winter darkness. This solitary labor was crucial for preserving not only religious texts, but also the very fabric of medieval intellectual life. Imagine a scribe hunched over a desk, perhaps by the flickering light of a tallow candle, his breath frosting in the frigid air of his cell. The work was painstaking and demanded immense dedication. Parchment, made from animal skins, sheep, calf, or goat, had to be carefully prepared, scraped thin, and smoothed to provide the perfect writing surface. Inks, derived from natural pigments and gall nuts, were mixed and applied with quills cut from bird feathers, requiring a steady hand and keen eye. Monasteries, particularly during the early medieval period, were primary centers of literacy and book production, and records from scriptoria like that of St. Gall or Monte Cassino illustrate the systematic, often communal effort involved in copying and preserving manuscripts. The glow of knowledge was both literal and metaphorical. Literally, the scribe's work pushed back against the physical darkness of unlit spaces. Metaphorically, it was the preservation and transmission of learning in an era where books were rare, precious objects. During Christmas, the focus was often on religious texts. Copying entire Bibles, psalters, or liturgical books ensured their survival and dissemination. However, many scribes also copied classical texts, philosophical treatises, and scientific works, thereby safeguarding the intellectual heritage of antiquity. The Christmas season, with its temporary lull in external affairs, might have provided an opportunity for concentrated focus on these tasks. For some scribes, it would be a time for dedicated transcription. For others, the painstaking work of illumination, adding intricate designs and vibrant colors to the finished pages. This quiet, often anonymous labor within the scribe's cell provided the bedrock for all medieval scholarship, theology, and administration. It was through their tireless efforts that knowledge was transmitted across generations, making the silent act of writing during Christmastide a profound and lasting contribution to the intellectual light of the medieval world. It ensured that the narratives, both sacred and secular, would endure far beyond the fleeting celebrations of the season. The solitary work of the scribe in his cell was complemented by the communal vocalizations heard throughout monastic cloisters and chapels. The rhythmic monk's chant. This sacred music, an unbroken continuum of prayer and praise, was a defining characteristic of monastic life and particularly resonant during the intensified liturgical schedule of Christmastide. Through this chant, the enduring legacy of words was not only preserved, but breathed into living memory, shaping the spiritual landscape of the age. Imagine the chapel in the pre-dawn hours of Christmas Day, the air frigid, filled with the resonant, undulating tones of dozens of voices. Monks, cloaked in their habits, would intone the intricate melodies of Gregorian chant, psalms, and hymns. This was not mere performance. It was an act of profound devotion, a form of active prayer that engaged mind, body, and spirit. The melodic lines, unaccompanied by instrumentation, relied on the acoustics of the stone architecture to carry the sound, creating an ethereal and deeply moving experience. Liturgical books, painstakingly copied by scribes, provided the precise texts and musical notation for these daily offices, ensuring consistency across monasteries. The enduring legacy of words was thus manifested in sound. These chants often used Latin, the universal language of the Western Church, reinforcing its authority and unity. The words themselves, drawn from scripture, patristic writings, and centuries of theological development, carried profound meaning. For the monks, repeatedly chanting these texts was a meditative practice, deepening their understanding and internalizing the truths of their faith. During Christmas, specific chants would emphasize the prophecies of Christ's birth, the joy of the Nativity, and the theological significance of the Incarnation. This continuous cycle of chant, performed daily throughout the year and intensified at Christmastide, had a far-reaching impact beyond the cloister walls. These melodies, originating in monasteries, gradually influenced secular music and popular religious carols. The very structure and cadence of medieval Latin and vernacular literature, as scholars like Peter Dronke have explored, bear the imprint of this oral tradition. The monk's chant was, therefore, much more than a form of worship. It was a powerful cultural force, a living transmission of religious doctrine, wisdom, and emotion that underscored the spiritual centrality of Christmas within monastic life. It ensured that the sacred narratives were not merely read, but actively heard, felt, and remembered, perpetuating a legacy that echoes even into the modern understanding of the season. For many medieval individuals, the Christmas season, rather than being solely a time of static celebration, was sometimes marked by arduous journeys driven by spiritual rather than material quest. This was the pilgrim's path, a journey defined by weary feet and the promise of redemption, representing a profound expression of faith, even during the often treacherous winter months. Imagine a pilgrim, perhaps a penitent or an individual seeking miraculous healing, trudging through snow-dusted landscapes, their staff clutched firmly, their meager belongings bundled on their back. Travel in the medieval period was always challenging, but in winter it became a test of endurance. Roads were poor, shelter infrequent, and the cold relentless. Despite these hardships, the act of pilgrimage was deeply ingrained in the religious life of the High and Late Middle Ages. Destinations ranged from local shrines, often associated with specific saints or relics, to major international sites like Rome, Santiago de Compostela, or the holiest of all, Jerusalem. Accounts from pilgrims, such as Marjorie Kempe's autobiography, detail the physical and spiritual trials, as well as the moments of grace encountered on their journeys. The promise of redemption was the ultimate motivator. Pilgrimage was considered a meritorious act, believed to cleanse sins, secure divine favor, or even shorten time in purgatory. It was a tangible expression of faith, a penitential act that demonstrated one's devotion and earnest desire for spiritual improvement. For some, Christmas might have been the culminating point of such a journey, arriving at a shrine or a cathedral just in time for the High Mass, experiencing the nativity story unfold in a place imbued with sacred power. While the majority of pilgrims would likely have avoided intense winter travel, unless absolutely necessary, the Christmas period, with its heightened spiritual significance, might have inspired some, particularly those seeking specific blessings or in fulfillment of a vow. The very hardship of the journey would have amplified the spiritual reward. The act of placing one foot in front of the other, each step an act of faith, was a powerful metaphor for the soul's journey towards God. The weary feet were a testament to the sacrifice, and the destination, whether a local shrine or a grand cathedral, offered not just physical rest, but profound spiritual renewal. The pilgrim's path, therefore, stood as a testament to the depth of individual faith, a demonstration that for some, the true meaning of Christmas was found not in static celebration, but in the arduous personal quest for spiritual grace along the endless roads of medieval Europe. After the arduous journey, the pilgrim's weary feet would eventually find solace in the shrine's embrace. These sacred sites, whether grand cathedrals housing the relics of a saint or simpler local chapels, offered a physical and spiritual haven, serving as powerful focal points for collective devotion. Here, the weight of shared belief became almost palpable, creating an atmosphere of profound communal faith, especially during the heightened spiritual season of Christmastide. Imagine a pilgrim, having survived the rigors of winter travel, finally entering a cathedral dedicated to a revered saint. The air, thick with the lingering scent of incense, would be cold but alive with the murmur of prayers and the soft glow of votive candles. At the heart of the shrine lay the relics: a bone, a fragment of clothing, or an object associated with the saint, often encased in an ornate reliquary, sometimes adorned with jewels. These relics were not merely historical curiosities. They were believed to be conduits of divine power, capable of intercession and miraculous healing. Accounts from medieval visitors to shrines, detailing miraculous cures and spiritual experiences, abound in hagiographies and travelogues. The weight of shared belief was a powerful force. Dozens, hundreds, or even thousands of individuals united in their faith and common purpose would fill these spaces. Their collective prayers, hopes, and anxieties would create an almost tangible spiritual energy. For many, encountering the relics of a saint was the culmination of a lifelong dream, a moment of profound personal and communal connection to the divine. During Christmastide, this spiritual intensity would be amplified as the sacred themes of incarnation and redemption resonated deeply within these hallowed spaces. These shrines played a vital role in medieval society, acting as spiritual anchors, economic hubs, and social centers. They were not just places of individual devotion, but also sites where communities forged and renewed their identities. The presence of pilgrims, despite the difficulties of travel, testified to the enduring power of these sacred places and the widespread conviction in the efficacy of the saints' intercession. The shrine's embrace, therefore, symbolized not only physical sanctuary for the tired traveler, but also spiritual succor for the earnest seeker. In a world where faith was paramount, these sites, particularly at Christmas, offered a powerful collective affirmation of their shared belief system, providing comfort, inspiration, and a profound sense of belonging forged in the face of both personal and collective challenges. As the long Christmas Eve night gave way to Yuletide morn, the world stirred, not with the frenetic anticipation of modern holidays, but with a palpable sense of renewal. The crisp air of the morning, imbued with the subtle scent of wood smoke and a lingering frost, carried a quiet, yet profound, renewed hope. For medieval people, this was not just another dawn. It marked the turning point of the year, both astronomically and spiritually. Imagine stepping out into the hushed morning, the ground glittering with a fresh layer of hoarfrost, or perhaps a soft blanket of snow. The air bites with a clean, invigorating cold, awakening the senses. After the longest night, there was a noticeable, albeit incremental, increase in daylight. This shift, profoundly observed and understood by pre-industrial societies, was a cause for genuine celebration. The sun had indeed returned, proving the ancient rituals correct, and confirming the Christian promise of light over darkness. Almanacs and astronomical observations, often recorded in monastic chronicles, meticulously tracked these seasonal changes, underscoring their importance. The renewed hope was multifaceted. On a practical level, it signified the beginning of the long journey towards spring, towards planting, and ultimately towards the next harvest. The immediate anxieties of deep winter, though far from over, were momentarily alleviated by this astrological reassurance. On a spiritual level, Christmas Day marked the celebration of the Nativity of Christ, the symbolic birth of the light of the world. This infused the season with a powerful message of redemption and divine promise, offering spiritual solace and an optimistic outlook amidst the earthly struggles. For the medieval individual, keenly attuned to the rhythms of nature and the dictates of faith, this was a time of internal and external awakening. The stillness of the morning, broken only by perhaps the distant lowing of cattle or the chiming of a church bell, held a powerful sense of promise. It was an opportunity to reflect on the past year, to give thanks for survival, and to look forward with a fresh perspective. Yuletide morn's awakened senses were tied intimately to the land and the divine, cementing Christmas as not just a singular event, but a profound turning point, a pause for gratitude, and a moment for the quiet, yet deeply felt reawakening of hope for the future. As the medieval Christmastide drew to its close, typically around Twelfth Night or Epiphany, the seasonal shift brought with it a distinct echo. The initial solemnity, the vibrant feasting, the quiet devotion, and the undercurrents of both superstition and charity gradually faded. What remained were the echoes of joy, resonant still across centuries, revealing the fundamental commonalities of the unchanged human heart, despite the vast chasm of time and circumstance. Imagine the lingering warmth of a communal fire, the faint scent of spices in the air, and the quiet satisfaction of a community that had navigated another perilous winter, affirming life and faith. The memory of a particularly rich meal, a boisterous game, a shared carol, or a poignant church service would persist, carrying through the leaner months ahead. While the material manifestations of medieval Christmas were vastly different from our own, the underlying human desire for connection, celebration, and hope remained remarkably consistent. Historical documents, including household records, personal letters, and diaries where they exist, occasionally offer a glimpse into these deeply felt, often simple pleasures. The medieval Christmas, a complex tapestry woven from pagan survivals, Christian theology, social hierarchy, and the stark realities of survival, was ultimately a testament to human resilience. It was an affirmation of life in the face of death, light in the face of darkness, and community in the face of isolation. The profound joy, often hard-won, that permeated these celebrations was a response to the very real challenges of the age, and in that regard, it fundamentally aligns with our contemporary experience of seeking light and joy during the darkest time of year. This unchanged human heart across centuries is perhaps the most enduring lesson. While the technologies, societal structures, and daily routines have been utterly transformed, the core human needs that Christmas addresses, the need for belonging, for shared stories, for hope in renewal, for moments of respite and generosity, are timeless. The medieval individual, despite living in a world so alien to our own, sought and found meaning in these festive rituals, just as we do today. The celebrations of medieval Christmastide, therefore, are not merely historical curiosities. They are reflections of a universal human impulse to mark seasons, to gather, to believe, and to hope, proving that even across 1,000 years, the spirit of Christmas, in its most profound sense, remains deeply, reassuringly familiar.